Before you log in and play Mists of Pandaria for the first time, there is one super important thing you need to know. You can't really compare MOP and retail. Like, don't even try. This isn't your grandpa's expansion. No, this is where some of WoW's legends were made, and you could be next. And today, we're here to tell you what to expect by ranking each spec on a tier list from easy to hard based on one concept: skill floors, which is kinda like the bare minimum needed to get started as a new player. And speaking of which, the beginning of a new expansion is where anyone, including you, can achieve something great. This is the most exciting time to PvP, because the playing field gets leveled, and with the right knowledge, you can get an insane start over everyone else. We take this seriously, so we sweated it out and created not only a brand new add-on that instantly gets you the perfect UI with one click, but we paired it with creating some amazing class courses with the best players, covering everything you need to get ahead insanely fast. Trust us, MOP is a completely different game than what you're used to, and knowing exactly what's worth tracking in this expansion will make a massive difference. Let us set everything up for you, so you don't have to worry about anything but playing the game. We have you covered with the best nameplate profiles, weak auras, omnibar, and more, all available with the click of a button, with the complete package only being available to skill cap members. And as you're gearing up at the start of the expansion, skill cap members will even get in-game BIS lists and reforged profiles automatically set to give you the perfect stats in PvP. Trust us, it will save you hours of research. So if you want to truly get ahead, you're definitely going to want to use all of the amazing features we offer at Skill Caps, which comes with a 400 rating increase guarantee. Check us out after this to access both retail and MOP guides in one subscription with the exclusive discount link below. Now let's go through each melee one by one, starting with the hardest specs first. Despite being one of the best melee in the previous expansion, the difficulty curve for Feral Druid skyrockets in MOP. Not only does Feral have one of the most difficult rotations in the game, with snapshotting being a huge part of DPS, but this is the expansion where Predatory Swiftness got a little rework and no longer includes Cyclone. This means having to cast Clone the old-fashioned way instead of relying on instant procs every few seconds. As always, Feral Druid is one of those specs with a ton of responsibilities. Sometimes you're cosplaying as a sub-rogue, and other times as a prot warrior. You need to do a lot in order to win and have a good feel of when it's safe to push in and when it's time to kite. Speaking of sub-rogues, this is also a relatively hard spec to play in MOP for a reason you might not expect. Even though rogues get a bunch of new tools like Subterfuge and Burst of Speed, these two talents are a big reason why the spec has a completely different playstyle in MOP. Unlike Kata, where rogues are basically just Fury Warriors in disguise, MOP Rogue has a more hit-and-run type playstyle. Your damage falls off a cliff the moment Subterfuge or Shadow Dance ends, which means kiting to the nearest pillar to reset. It's a weird adjustment that some players might struggle to make. And this is all on top of the classic rogue responsibilities, like playing around DRs and setting up kills with CC. So, now that you know what a hard spec looks like in MOP, let's look at easy specs. And we definitely think Arms Warrior falls in this category. And before anyone gets upset, remember that this video is exclusively about skill floors. Warriors are not only one of the strongest classes in the game, but at its core, the spec is all about damage. If you're simply doing your damage rotation correctly, you will see results at this spec. This is why our courses for Warrior are the most effective method for learning this spec, teaching you how to master sustained damage and burst. And it also helps that warriors are pretty tanky in this expansion. Not only do you have the classic shield wall and defensive stance, but MOP also introduces Die by the Sword and the completely broken Second Wind to help you passively stay alive at low HP. Oh yeah, and speaking of stances, they're not really complicated at all anymore. Overall, Arms Warrior is a really good entry-level spec with lots of room for growth. The only other melee which technically falls in the easy category is Combat Rogue. Yes, Combat Rogue. There's no outlaw in this expansion. Combat Rogue plays more similar to Kata Sub-Rogue in the sense that it's basically just a Fury Warrior in leather armor. The entire spec is based around Bandit's Guile, which is a buff that slowly turns from green to yellow to red, representing increasing damage. Combine a red buff with a killing spree and you can do a ton of damage. Overall, combat is way more linear. Your goal is simple: have uptime, kidney shot on cooldown, and try and red buff spree whenever you can. Of course, it is a rogue spec, which means needing to play with some finesse, but doing damage is so easy as combat that it really levels everything out. Every other melee falls somewhere in the moderate difficulty. Let's talk about it. Next up is Windwalker Monk, which is definitely one of the best specs in the entire game, but requires a bit more effort. Unlike Warrior, Windwalker has a bit more complexity, starting with their rotation, which involves some maintenance and is less cut and dry compared to other melee. In some comps, Monk is almost like a dot class, needing to spread out Storm, Earth, and Fire across multiple targets, all while trying to set up kills, kinda like a sub-rogue, keeping targets locked down with Leg Sweep and Fist of Fury. So even though the base toolkit of Monk is strong, you're going to have a lot to manage, especially in 3v3. Then we have our two more traditional melee hybrids, starting with Ret Paladin. The reason why this spec falls into the moderate tier is because on one hand, it does have a relatively easy rotation on top of a fairly streamlined win condition. Just like every other expansion, your win condition is simply lining up burst with CC every time you can, and having a longer range on Hodge definitely makes this easier. However, the hard part of Ret Paladin is of course all the utility you have to manage. Not only do you have your bops and freedoms to dish out, but Hand of Sacrifice can now be used to remove CC. Learning how and when to use this spell will be a pretty big learning curve for many players. Enhancement Shaman is in a similar position. Rotationally, this spec is relatively straightforward, and one huge benefit of playing this spec is the massive power spike you get during Ascendance. Seriously, this cooldown is like activating a cheat code in MOP. Landing CC is also pretty straightforward in this expansion, as Maelstrom stacks can be used to make Hex instant cast, which is incredibly useful in the Resto Druid meta. The main learning curve is just weaving in utility. Between grounding, tremor, healing tide, and off heals, there's a lot you can do to dictate the game, and you need good map awareness when playing Shaman. Last up on the moderate tier, we have Unholy DK. Now, this one is a little bit tricky, since rotationally this spec is a bit more difficult, especially if you want to min-max. One of your main goals is to constantly rotate your ruins, converting them into death ruins in order to necrotic strike, all while keeping up diseases and doing a bit of pet management. If you've never played DK before, this can be a bit awkward at first. The saving grace is the fact that Unholy DK really doesn't have that many responsibilities in Arena. You're not a Ret Paladin or Enhancement Shaman needing to juggle a bunch of utility. Instead, you're basically just a damage bot, and your number one priority is just to pad the meters as much as possible. With that in mind, there is definitely some skill expression to this spec, like getting good dark sims and being highly disruptive. But since your main job is pretty straightforward, we think moderate difficulty makes the most sense. Now remember, this is only the entry level for most specs. There's definitely a lot of room to grow in MOP. Our new class guides scale with you, starting with the fundamentals you absolutely need and then giving you advanced tips to help climb. And with our premium add-on profiles, you will have everything you need to master any class, tracking the exact information needed to play just like the pros. Alright, so that's all of our melee. What about ranged? We're once again going to start with the hardest specs first, including one you probably expected. Given how strong and popular arms warriors will be, life can be rough for a Shadow Priest. Don't get us wrong, this is probably one of the most fun specs you can play in MOP, but not when you're getting trained every game. Since there is a law that Shadow Priests need a major rework every expansion, it's no surprise that SP sees some big changes going into MOP. You now have a combo point system called Shadow Orbs, which you can spend on Devouring Plague or Psychic Horror. That's right, now you have to choose whether you want Burst or CC. Getting these orbs takes a bit of time and requires you to cast Mind Blast, which can be instant, but only by having VT up, which means having dots on multiple targets if you want to play your class. This is also an expansion where hybrid healing actually matters, so being a good Shadow Priest requires you to be a jack of all trades, which isn't easy to do with the TSG breathing down your neck. Destro Warlock has a similar problem and gets absolutely bullied by melee. Even though Chaos Bolt hits like a truck, it has an absurdly long cast time, which can make bursting super frustrating, especially when all it takes is a single interrupt or grounding totem to completely shut it down. This is why Destro Warlock needs to play very specific comps. It needs to be carried by a mage in order to actually work, and as a standalone spec, it's just a bit clunky. And rounding out the hardest casters is Balanced Druid, which might be a bit surprising since this spec was basically a Moonfire bot back in Cataclysm. MOP is more of a treadmill simulator, since most of your games will be spent running anyway, and if you play 2v2, you're basically just a Resto Druid with Star Surge. Boomkins are almost like a sub-rogue in MOP, constantly running away to try and reset the fight, waiting for DRs to be ready again to set up a kill. It's one of the squishiest specs in the game, and you really can't afford to stay pushed in very long. In the earlier seasons, Balanced Druid might be a struggle, since you really don't have the damage to carry and need to play like a support spec more than anything else. Alright, but what about the easy range DPS? Beast Mastery Hunter. Of course, this is the most aggressive and straightforward Hunter spec by far, thanks to Bestial Wrath. Not only does BM have a fairly straightforward rotation, but its damage is really hard to shut down and avoid. We will talk about this more in a bit, but one of the difficulty curves to playing any Hunter spec in MOP is that the class is a bit squishy. You can't really compare MOP Hunter to Retail Hunter with its 4 different defensives and get out of jail free cards. You can get trained as a hunter in MOP and it will suck, but at least as BM, you don't really suffer much damage loss. And speaking of damage, we're also putting Elemental Shaman on the easy tier. Ellie gets a massive quality of life improvement in MOP with a rework to Lava Surge, which now makes your Lava Burst instant cast on top of resetting its cooldown. This makes Ellie a true slot machine spec. If you get lucky with Lava Surge procs and Mastery Overloads, you can absolutely demolish someone's HP without ever needing to hard cast. MOP also gives Elemental a huge quality of life improvement on the defensive end, granting Shamanistic Rage, which is a wall that is usable while stunned, as well as making Nature's Guardian baseline, which is an auto BM trinket that can also activate in the middle of a stun. So even though Shamans can be good kill targets in matchups, they have way better defensives compared to Kata. But now let's take a look at the remaining specs that land somewhere in the middle. Here we have Marks and Survival Hunter, and we're grouping these two specs together because they're basically the same thing with a few different buttons and a wildly different damage profile. Obviously, the advantage of playing Hunter is the fact that you don't need to actually cast and you can do all of your damage on the move as these two specs. But as we mentioned, staying alive is the tricky part of playing Hunter in MOP. You can't afford to make many defensive mistakes, and you're going to be the target in a lot of matchups, so you will have to be comfortable playing under pressure. Next up, we have two mage specs starting with Fire, and this one is a bit tricky to rank since rotationally the spec is relatively simple, but your win condition is a bit strange. Your gimmick is to burst players down in Deep Freeze by sending as many Pyroblasts as you can back to back to back. Seems easy enough on paper, but this means pressing Inferno Blast and then hopping around for a few seconds since you can't really press any damage globals unless you want to throw away your Heating Up proc. And then once you do get a Pyro proc, you have to find a way to land a Deep Freeze, which is a bit tricky without Fingers of Frost. This means using Frost Jaw or Frost Nova to set up your Deep, and then doing 600 APM as you find some way to chain together 3 Pyroblasts in a row. Frost is a bit more linear and is arguably the easiest mage spec since you have tons of instant cast damage and this brand new Living Bomb ability to pad the meters and feed your procs. But at the end of the day, you are a mage after all, which means playing quarterback for your team. This isn't a class designed for someone who wants to do nothing and win, no offense to all the warlocks out there, and in MOP, you are rewarded for playing aggressive with your CC. And speaking of warlocks, we have the last two lock specs on the medium tier, starting with Affliction. Here, we have another case of a class that would be easy on paper if it wasn't for those meddling warriors and their stupid cleavy friends. But unlike Shadow Priest, who has to play a fake casting simulator all game, Affliction Warlock has one key advantage. Or, well, two. Soul Burn and Soul Swap. In MOP, you can actually press Soul Burn to get a full row of dots instantly on a target, and then spend the remainder of the game swapping them around like a red solo cup at a party. But we don't want to make things sound too easy since there is a lot you can do to min-max, like snapshotting your dots and micromanaging your pet. Now, Demo Warlock is very, very strange in these older expansions and is really nothing like the design you see in the modern game. In MOP, Demo Warlocks have an ability called Metamorphosis, which was eventually stolen by Demon Hunters, of course, but this ability basically makes them gods for a few seconds, allowing them to do massive damage with Chaos Wave. Your playstyle is to basically pool resources and then hop into Illidan form every now and then to try and AoE one-shot the entire team. But outside of this, you don't really do much damage and need to find other ways to maintain tempo. Just like a mage, playing a warlock comes with a bunch of passive responsibilities. As nice as it would be to simply deal damage, you need to be very proactive with your CC. So just as a quick recap, here we have all of our specs, and sorry to all of you believers in the arcane dream, we really wouldn't recommend this spec for serious arena. But what if you're looking to heal? Here's what we think is the hardest healer. It might seem like a hot take, but we're going to put Restoration Shaman in this tier. The elephant in the room is the fact that the healing part of Shaman isn't actually that hard. Your healing rotation only involves a few buttons, with some fairly intuitive combos. However, there are a few things which make Shaman hard. Number one, this is the era of training the blue, which is especially rough as Resto. It is the healer most susceptible to getting trained by melee, and you have less defensive options compared to modern expansions. Number two, your totems actually matter. These days, players will snipe down your healing stream in 0.1 seconds if you aren't careful, so knowing where to position your totems is super important. And number three, you have to do a lot to be disruptive. Part of what makes this class work is being annoying, which means being hyper aware of everything going on around you, being quick to shear or grounding when needed. Now let's take a look at what we think are the easiest specs. We're actually going to go with Holy Priest here, who has a very simple rotation once you get a hold of things. This spec is centered around its PvP set bonus, which causes Prayer of Mending to give the target a buff, increasing the next flash heal, greater heal, or serenity by 50%. And 2 out of the 3 spells here can be instant. That's right, as long as you aren't AFK, you're going to be getting instant flash heals, which can be buffed by these Holy Sparks to do an insane amount of healing. On top of having lots of instant healing, Holy Priest also has a much easier time landing CC thanks to the Holy Trinity of Chastise, Feather, and Spectral Guise, which Priest can use to zip across the map and land fears like never before. Healing isn't always a walk in the park, and sometimes you will run out of instant healing, but overall, Holy Priest is very intuitive. Holy Paladins are in a similar situation. While this spec is mechanically quite simple, having a ton of instant cast or fast cast heals, the main issue is CC avoidance. Playing a melee cleave mirror is going to feel like a breeze, as there isn't anything standing in your way to heal or to cross the map for CC. However, keep in mind Mage and Druid are some of the most popular classes in this expansion, and they will be hungry to CC you all game. You really need to play with this in mind, being proactive with your positioning and being hyper selective on when you cross the map. If you can't do this, then you're going to have a bad time. Every other healer will land somewhere in the middle. Despite the fact that it's the best healer in the expansion, Resto Druid does have a bit of a learning curve for some players. It's one of those healers that needs to balance a bunch of responsibilities. You need to manage HOTS, obviously, but depending on your comp, you might play a crucial role in your team's offensive setups. There's also a ton of min-maxing in this expansion thanks to Soul of the Forest, which you can learn more about in our Resto Druid course. So on top of needing to be proactive with your heals, you need to make a lot of decisions with how you spend your most important proc. Obviously though, if you can master all this, you will be rewarded. Moving on, we have Mistweaver Monks, who are the undisputed HPS gods in Mists of Pandaria. Unless you're in CC, it's pretty unlikely anyone is going to die. Monks have a ton of healing from their bread and butter soothing mist combos, but can also do insane HPS on the move thanks to healing spheres, also known as orbs, which can be spammed at a target location with a super short GCD. Monks also have one of the most overpowered passive defensives in the game thanks to Dematerialize, which makes them immune to all spells and attacks for almost 3 seconds after taking a stun. The main learning curve of this spec is managing mana T, since Mistweaver can actually quite fast, and avoiding CC since it can still be quite punishing for this spec. In 2v2, Monks can be easy to play since there are less threats, but in 3v3, it can be a bit of a challenge. And in case you didn't know, we generally wouldn't recommend Disc Priest. But as a professional tip, you do have the most overpowered button in the entire game. As long as you click this, you can increase your rating by at least 400. And no matter what class or expansion you decide to play, we've got you covered at SkillCapped with a rating gain guarantee for both Classic and Retail. We are the #1 resource for mastering MOP PvP with hundreds of guides available right now. And if you want to skip the annoying process of setting up every single add-on, we've got you covered with a brand new update to the SkillCapped add-on, which gives you the best PvP UI with the click of a button. There's no better time than now to sign up with a single monthly fee that gets you access to guides from Classic, The War Within, and eventually Midnight. 3 games, 1 subscription, and over 400 rating guaranteed. Visit skillcap.com to learn more. As always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.